The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
And good morning and welcome to Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy. I'm Nancy.
And I'm Shannon.
Hi, Shannon.
Thrilled to be here with you.
Thrilled to be here with you, too.
We have a big show.
We do. We have lots of guests.
Lots of guests, overflowing guests. We're going to start with Leah Hirschfeld, who's going to be from the research arm of CARD.
Research assistant,
yes. And she's going to be talking with us about a study. We're going to do that in like 3 seconds. But we also want you to know that we have 2 other guests. Vince Redmond, who's a licensed marriage family therapist, is going to be joining us. And then Jackie
Folks, right.
Show the book, because she's an author.
Adventures with Big E, Help with Hygiene.
It's a great social story for our kids. So we're going to be talking with her about her inspiration for that. That's all happening. And if we have time, we will hit in the news as well. But right now, via Skype, we want to welcome back to the show Leah Hirschfeld. And she is from the research department of CARD. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure. I'll give a quick update on who I am. Thank you guys so much, by the way, for having me. I love being on your segment. It's always a joy.
We love having you.
Thanks. I'm Leah. I'm part of our R&D team at CARD. I'm a research coordinator. So basically, I get to ask a bunch of cool questions, try to convince parents and kiddos to participate in our research, and then hopefully draw some cool conclusions that will help both our kids and our parents and the families we serve. And at a larger kind of add to the autism field as well.
Okay.
So it's a pretty neat opportunity.
We're always thrilled to have you here. And today on the show, she's going to be talking about a very specific research study, which is going to, I'm sure, get a lot of traction in the news. Mm-hmm. And people are going to have emotional reactions to this. And I just want to make sure that everybody knows that when we talk about research here, it's really important to us and to everybody here to not feel like a finger is ever being pointed at a person. Both of us really hate it when it feels like they're saying, see, this is your fault that your child has autism, as if there is a fault or there's anybody to pin blame on. That is not ever the intent here. And so we want to make sure that people understand that this is a pretty preliminary study and that nobody is trying to point fingers on anybody. I know it feels that way sometimes. Right? Okay, so having said that, Leah, you probably have other disclaimers you want to give about what you're about to talk about.
I do, and I love that introduction as well. And part of the cool thing about this segment, I think, is that we get to take really neat research and hopefully bring it out to light and let people know about it, but also really dig deep and kind of say, hey, this is really cool research, but research has its limits. And just because it was in this cool journal or by this well-known university doesn't mean that there aren't limits. It just means that, it's very cool. So on that note, now that we've built up all of this suspense over this article, the article I wanted to talk about came out last month. It's by a group at Duke University, and they were looking at THC and cannabis in father's sperm. And there's a lot of cool things about this. First being that it's neat to see research on fathers. We don't see it very often. And also it's neat to see some research being done on cannabis, as states are legalizing it more, as it becomes more widely accepted and used. it's great to see research on it because there's a lot we don't know, and there's a lot that we assume to know. So it's nice to see both cannabis research and research on fathers. There's a lot about mothers out there, but it's cool to see kind of sperm because we're not conceiving on our own over here. So, so what they did was these researchers looked at both adult men and then also rats. And rats might sound weird, but it's pretty typical when you see preliminary research that we are doing work on rats or mice. They're small, they're easy to use, and we can kind of check out what's going on before you jump into human sample sizes. So what the researchers did was they looked at adult males, and they just first looked at sperm from adult males who had used cannabis and then individuals who hadn't. And so what they looked at specifically, and I have to look at my notes on this one, they were looking at a protein called Discs Large Associated Protein 2, or DLGAP2. And this protein they were specifically looking at because it has been associated before with ASD and other neurological disorders. In part, they think because it does play a role in synapses and neuron organization and signaling in the brain. So what that means is they do believe that this protein is helping in the brain when neurons are firing and trying to talk to each other. This protein plays a role. So the researchers looked at adult males' sperm and who had used cannabis and who hadn't to see if there was a difference in this protein. And there was. And they did find pretty significant differences in the sperm of individuals who had used cannabis versus who hadn't. And so that kind of got the wheels turning, and they looked at the rat sample next. And so with the rat sample, they looked at THC rats, and what they did was they exposed them orally, so the rats took some THC pill, and then they looked at controls. And what they found again was that they saw the differences again in the sperm of the rats who'd been exposed to cannabis product versus the rats who hadn't. And then, and this is kind of where it gets very interesting, is the next part they looked at the offspring of the rats. So the offspring of the rats, they looked to see if, again, that on that protein, that DLGAP2 protein, if that had been affected. And this is where the results get really interesting because it's not super clear. The results seem to indicate that there were some differences, but they weren't statistically significant, which means statistically significant is just the term that researchers usually use when we're trying to make sure that what the results we're showing are important and matter. And it's interesting, actually, you usually see a publishing bias, so usually you cannot get papers published that have results that aren't statistically significant. It's a lot harder. And some of these results were, but a lot of them also weren't. And the authors make a note about a few of their, and this is again where we come into talking about how research is really cool and how you might see the title of an article and kind of get stressed about it. But when you start to dig deeper, there's a lot more going on as well. But so on 2 points, the researchers themselves note that the results might not have been statistically significant because their numbers are really small. And we've talked about that before on the show, where if the numbers aren't big enough, the sample size isn't large enough, the statistically significant value might not be there. And so for this, they only had 6 rats exposed to the THC, and they had 8 controls. So we're still talking pretty small numbers, especially for a rat study. And then on top of that, and this is, again, we don't know that much about autism still, right? We think that this protein has some effect here, but we're not 100% positive. And the authors also mention that even though the results weren't statistically significant, because of the role that this protein plays, even minor changes might affect it drastically. It also might not. It might really need to take a major change in this protein to change it into something like a neurological disorder. It also might not. We just don't know right now, right? So there's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot going on. Really cool article. It's great to see things working with, articles working on fathers, working with cannabis, because there's a lot we don't know there. But still taking a critical eye and looking and seeing, okay, how many participants are in this, even if it's rats? How, is it actually the offspring of the humans they were looking at or the offsprings of the rats that they ended up looking at? And also, how much of this do we actually know? So very preliminary, very cool study. And hopefully there's going to be a lot more done here to kind of address this and keep looking at it. There's a lot in this paper that was really exciting and really cool to keep looking at. And there's still a lot that we don't know about it.
Okay.
So
I have questions.
Yeah.
The first thing I always like to do is sort of repeat back, translated to see if I have it.
Right.
So basically, they looked at they had men that had cannabis and THC, and some who hadn't, and they saw that when somebody is exposed to cannabis, that this protein is less in their sperm. Correct?
It's not necessarily less, but this is not. I'll also say I'm not a biologist. I don't know much about proteins. It's not that it's less, but that it was
Different.
demyelinated or something.
Okay. So it is
but yeah.
different. It is different in the sperm if they've been exposed to cannabis and whatever. And then they went and looked at this in mice, saw that was the same. So then they looked at the rat children. But out of the 6 rats that they had on cannabis, how many of them had children that were markedly different? Do we know?
Actually, that's not reported.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, that wasn't
Okay.
in there. I'll check it, but from what my notes, I don't have it.
And then
So we don't know whether there was less of an incidence of autism or more of an incident.
And obviously, with rats, it's not autism, it's autism-like behaviors.
Autism-like behaviors.
Yeah. So we know that it was not, what their phrase was, it was not statistically significant, although there
Right.
was something.
Right.
And they don't know, because of the sample size, they don't know if they'd had more of them, if it would have been statistically significant. Are we in the
Right.
neighborhood?
Yeah, you guys are pretty
Okay.
spot on. And I'll go into it a little bit more. So you guys are totally right. They don't know, they didn't report, these offsprings had more autistic looking behaviors, which honestly, you guys might know more about that than I do even. I don't know much about the mice and the rats world. What they did notice and what they did look for was how much that protein differences were in the offspring, and they didn't see it in the same way that they thought they would. They saw it with the neurons.
Got it.
But
Okay.
what they saw with the neurons was not statistically significant.
But they didn't tell us how many of the rat offspring had this difference.
Right.
Okay. So here are my other questions. Do we know the amount of cannabis in either the human trial or in the rat trial? Was it like, how a lot of times they will do the trial and they will feed them 7 pounds of something, which is more than any person would normally consume. So do we have any idea, was it a ridiculous amount of cannabis that they were giving people, or was it something within the norm?
So for the rats, it was in the norm. I can pull up the exact number, but in the rats, it was supposed to be equivalent to a human user who daily did cannabis.
I see. Okay.
I'm not so sure about the human adult males though.
Okay. Well, they're not going to give them something
Right.
that would, be so harmful,
Right, right.
because do no harm, right? Okay. Well, it's all very interesting.
Yeah.
And again, we want to say preliminary.
And what's the next step? Will they continue with a study of this type? And
Yeah. So I think they're still going to continue working on it. I think they're going to be looking at more rats and more males. And I'm hoping, I don't know if they're going to do it specifically, but I don't know if you even can, but I'm hoping that we can kind of move that into adult males and looking
Right.
at their offspring as well, but that gets all sorts of more complicated. So hopefully they'll be, again, very preliminary, but hopefully they'll be expanding this to a larger section of the rats. And I'm also hoping there's other ways you can do THC. So the paper said that they specifically gave them oral, but they can do it to mimic more how you might inhale it. So I'm hoping that they also do potentially different forms of exposure to the THC to see if that also has some effect.
okay.
Very, very
Right. Yeah,
interesting.
very
So
interesting.
something that I'm sure there will be a lot more studies
Right.
about to see, what we come
Yeah.
up with. Leah,
Well,
you're
thank you, Leah.
amazing, and you always fill our minds with things to talk about. This
Thank
now
you guys so much for having me on. It's
this
always
now
a
becomes
pleasure.
dinner conversation,
Right.
right? News study. Did you see? Okay. Well, we're thrilled, and please give our love to everybody on the research end of things.
Of course. Thank you guys so much for having us on.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.
All right, we're going to
Okay.
take a quick break, and we're going to come back with Vince Redmond.
Yeah.
Stick with us.
Dr. Grandin, what is it like for you personally to have become the most celebrated person in the field of autism?
Well, I feel it's a responsibility. I get a lot of emails and letters from young kids. In fact, at the last conference I was at, I got a whole envelope of letters from kids in an English class. What makes me pleased is I think I'm inspiring a lot of kids to succeed, because I want to see kids succeed. Now, one problem I'm seeing with some of the fully verbal kids is they're not getting stretched enough. I see kids coming up to me at conferences where nobody's taught them how to shake hands. See, when I was a young child, I had to be party host at my mother's parties. I had to shake hands, say please and thank you, have table manners, learn how to shop. And I'm seeing too many situations where they aren't learning those basic skills.
Yeah, so you really think they need the basic skills that every child should learn?
Yes, now in the 50s, every child was taught social skills in a much more structured way. And today that's not the case. Now the so-called normal kids, they pick it up, but the autistic kids have got to be taught.
Okay.
And that's not being done enough.
What kind of preconceptions, though, do you think most people have about relating to those with ASD?
Autism is a really big spectrum. You're going all the way from Silicon Valley down to somebody with a lot of intellectual challenges. Now, the kinds of services and things a person needs is very different, those two ends of the spectrum. And I go to different places. I go to Silicon Valley, and I see a lot of people that I know are on the spectrum. And then I go see another kid that's smart at math, but nothing's being done to develop his skills, and he's getting addicted to video games. And they are the same kind of kid. The thing that I'm seeing, especially on the mild end of the spectrum, is too many kids sort of becoming the label. I'm very concerned about them getting a handicap mentality. Then I go over to the meatpacking plant, and there's a whole maintenance shop of old hippies that I know are on the spectrum, and they run that maintenance shop. And they've been there for years and years and years.
Why do you think the numbers, 1 in 68 now, have risen so dramatically?
I think on the mild end of the spectrum, it's increased detection. Because I can think of kids I went to elementary school with, kids I went to college with, that today would be diagnosed on the spectrum. I think that's a big part of it on the mild end of the spectrum. Now, I think there also is some severe autism that may have actually increased because there's more environmental contaminants and there's more medications being given during early pregnancy.
Dr. Grandin, you beg parents not to let their children with autism be defined by the DSM or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Why?
Well, I think the DSM made a big mistake removing Asperger's syndrome, because under the DMS-4, autism you had to have speech delay, Asperger was no speech delay. Now, you could argue scientific reasons for taking out the speech delay stuff, but from a service provider standpoint, you know, the kind of services that somebody who's nonverbal has is different than a mild kid with Asperger's. And I'm seeing too many fully verbal kids, less severe than me, getting put into a class with nonverbal kids. I'm seeing too many smart kids not learning job skills. That's another thing that I really push. Because when I was 13, my mother had got me in a sewing job. When I was 15, I was cleaning horse stalls. It's really important that students intern in a job before they graduate from high school. They got to learn that discipline of getting to work.
If you could speak to every business owner in America, what would you say to convince them to hire somebody on the autism spectrum?
Well, there's certain things they can do extremely well. In fact, the SAP Corporation is hiring people with autism. There's another Project Search, where there's work being done with collaborating with hospitals to train them to set up surgical instruments for different types of surgery. And they take longer to train, but once they're trained, they're super, super good and meticulous about making sure the instruments are set up right. And that's got about a 78% employment rate.
So you think the skills that those with ASD have to offer are often overlooked by people
Well,
that
I can,
employ?
as I said before, I can think of kids that I went to college with that definitely were on the autism spectrum. Those individuals are all employed in good jobs. And I think a lot of this gets back to pounding those manners in the 50s and the 60s, and kids being on things like paper routes where they learned work skills.
Why do you think the experts in the field of ASDs focus so intensely on the deficits and not on the strengths of
Well,
autism?
we need to be building up strengths. My ability in art was always encouraged. And I was encouraged to do lots of different kinds of art. If you got a third grader that's good at math and he can do a high school math book, let him do the high school math book. Don't hold them back.
I want to know why you think that so little attention has been paid to the sensory processing issues. What can we learn from those?
Well, I just heard about a brand new study that's been done up at the in California, Dr. Wu, and they took children aged 4 through 12 that had speech delay, and they stayed in their regular programs, ABA or whatever the speech therapy the school was doing, and then they got an hour a day of sensory therapy where they did a lot of variety of stimulation, like walk on different kinds of flooring, smell different smells, do different activities in a mirror, big variety, always doing more than one sensory thing at a time. And it was done as a controlled experiment, where half the kids just got the regular treatment and the other half got this added sensory treatment. And they got some really big, significant improvements. And they made the point of using all very inexpensive things that would be in any house.
There's so much division in the autism community. How do you think we can all come together and
Well,
find a common ground?
I think that merging Asperger's together with autism has made all of this worse, because you have a segment of very, very severely handicapped kids where they're never going to be able to live independently. That's a very different kind of situation than a mild Asperger's type of kid. You see, you're putting too many apples and oranges together. Every other diagnosis, like dyslexia, learning problems, ADHD, you've got a fully verbal kid. Only in autism, right now, are you getting a range going from, smart computer geek down to somebody who has very, very severe challenges. Now, I think the American Psychiatric Association originally figured the Asperger kids would get into this social communication category. That's not what's happened. Nobody's going into that because there's no funding for it.
As the most admired person in this field, and we are literally becoming an autism nation, what do you think the most important thing is for us to be aware of?
Well, there's a point where personality variants are just normal variation. I think a brain can be made more cognitive and thinking, or a brain can be made more social. Now, at what point does that become abnormal? There's no black and white dividing line. I'm getting concerned that what we're saying is abnormal is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Obviously, a child that has severe speech delay, that's an abnormality. But when you take the kids that are just kind of socially awkward, a lot of those kids are really smart. And then you got the person that's a total social butterfly. And let's think back to the caveman days. I don't think the social yak-yaks around the campfire made the first stone spear.
Dr. Grandin, thank you for inspiring all of us as parents and children.
And we are back, and as promised, now we have Vince Redmond, who is our Card Family Services Director, and he is going to talk to us a little bit about desensitization over the holidays, because we've got Halloween coming up, and then right after that, it seems like Thanksgiving, and things just one after the other, right, Shannon?
And Nancy and I were talking about this earlier, that a lot of times when we talk about it is the week before Halloween. And
Right.
sometimes some of the things that help to reduce the stress are things that you start now.
Right.
So we thought, well, let's just, there was a nip in the air last night here in Los Angeles.
Yes, there was. It
And
felt like
I've already
fall.
been talking about the holidays because
I
I'm
know.
all rev for it anyway. But anyway, for those of you who don't know Vince is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Vince is also, oh my gosh, he's just one of the most wonderful people, and his background just makes him that much more wonderful. A behavioral therapist for many, many years. In fact, he's featured, you guys, in the movie Recovered, which I just got to watch parts of it again recently, and it just makes me smile so hard when I see how young you were, Vince. It makes my face hurt. And I mean, come on. Vince is a very handsome man, but then you see him when you were just a boy and doing therapy.
25, I think, yeah.
Man, it's just amazing to see how you have grown and how you have worked in this field for so long, adding value to so many families. But so what I love about, one of the many things I love about Vince is that he sees it from both sides. He can help families as a licensed marriage family therapist, but he also knows firsthand what it's like when you're in the middle of a really intensive behavioral intervention and how stressful that can be. So Welcome back, Vince.
Thank you, thank you.
We love you. And, it's a rough, up, I know some parents who start to stress now, going, oh,
Right.
it's just a
Well,
matter of time.
Halloween is my least favorite holiday because of the fact of the candy and the sensory overload. And
Yeah, and for some people it's the fires. For some
Right.
people it's because like there's flames everywhere, what fake or real. For some people it's the scary costumes.
Right.
I've had my son run out of a Halloween store when we were getting, some little innocuous thing because he saw something and run out into a parking lot.
Right.
Because he was so terrified. So talk to us, Vince, help us. What can we be working on now?
And I think, and you bring up a good point, because I think sometimes what we do is our anxiety then kind of takes over, and we avoid and we delay and we avoid and we delay.
Amen.
And before we know it, it's October 29th, and it's 2 days before, Halloween, and we're like, oh my goodness, what do I do? And now I got to get costume. Do I do this? And we got to do this, and I can't do this, and he's not ready for this. And so I think sometimes we by putting it off, because I know it's only early September, but as you ladies were saying, it's here, right? You go to the stores and candy's out and decorations already there. It's time now to start prepping for it. It's time now where we have 6 to 8 weeks to really start preparing our kids, we're preparing our homes, preparing our schedules to accept Halloween, to do Halloween the way we're going to do it. It might not be the traditional way, but how we're going to do it as a family, how we're going to do it as a part of the community, or maybe not a part of the community, and that's okay. How are we going to celebrate that individually as our family dynamic is? But to do that, we need to start that now. We need to start laying that out by what are some of the things that are problematic. Is it transitions? Is it candy? Is it, the costumes, right? And we can start coming up with resolutions. We can start coming up with solutions on what to do so that the kids have a good time. The kids actually have a memorable and positive event. But I think the idea of, okay, October is 3 weeks away, is that 3 weeks is going to creep up on us like 3 hours. And before you know it, it's going to be the middle of October before we start working on that. And that might not be enough time. That might not be enough time to do everything that we might need to do, because we already have very busy schedules and very busy lives.
So go ahead, and your first suggestion is then to have your own timetable, which may be early by other people's standards, but for you may work.
Right. And create your own holiday. It could be on Halloween, we'll use Halloween as our example, but maybe it's not on Halloween. Maybe it's on the day before. Maybe it's something that we do with our own church or our own school or our own neighbors, or just maybe our own family. Let's create what's going to be the best for your family. We can do things to make the actual Halloween date successful for all the kids. But maybe it's something that might be too overwhelming, too much, too many people, too many things, and we need to isolate it and keep it smaller. We can do that. We can set up an event or a day that celebrates Halloween, but maybe it's not on Halloween. Yeah. We can do that. But either way, it's creating those memories, creating those experiences for the family and for the kids.
I'm really trying to be Johnny on it this year.
Right.
So that I don't get all the stress of the holidays.
Have you decided your costume for Jen already?
I already ordered it and it came in the mail.
Really? What is it?
I can't say because he'll, it's like privileged information.
Oh, it is? Okay.
But it's a very specific costume that I couldn't have gotten in a store.
Right.
And no, it's already been ordered and it already came because it was something you had to order with like 20 days notice.
Okay.
And so I already ordered it.
You're already on it, Shannon.
But now
Good for
I
you.
don't have my costume, so we have to talk more about that. We haven't
costumes.
figured that out.
No, we
But
haven't.
I will say this, that when he was little, my thing, because I love to craft, it's therapy for me. Every other year I would make a costume, or then the next year I would buy one, because I didn't have time every year to do it. But the making it did something, because then he would see it. And I would finish like one piece of it and put that on him, and then he would, there was one year where when he was little, like I don't even think he was 3, and I made him a little clown costume, and like a jester clown. And so I would make the one little shoe cover and I would put that on and he would wear that around all day. And what I didn't realize that what I was doing was desensitizing him to it.
Right.
And then I made the little hat thing that had to be tied on. And the first time he put it on, I said, let me just see. And I put it on and it was on for 3 seconds and then it was on the floor, right? But then, then I put it on him again and he wore it for
longer.
5 minutes. And then, by the time we got to an event before Halloween and he wore it for like 2 hours. Now on Halloween night, it didn't even last 3 seconds, but guess
Exactly.
what? I didn't care.
Right.
Because I'd already taken all the pictures before
Right,
Halloween.
right.
I'd taken him to Sears to get the pictures, right? It didn't matter what he wore on Halloween. I had the pictures, right? So, but I didn't realize how much I had desensitized him to it. And I didn't have to actually make the costume to do that, right? But you could get it early and put one piece on. And I also, I don't know about you guys, but in the month of October, there's like event.
Right,
You don't have
carnivals
to go
and-
to all of them.
No.
But as Vince is saying, pick one.
Right.
Pick one and go to that and
Right.
see
We
how
have a
it
big
goes.
carnival coming up this
Yeah.
weekend that we've already picked to go to.
That's a Halloween thing with a costume?
No, it's a celebration of the beginning of a town that we used to live in.
There
So,
you go.
Yeah, they have a parade, then they have a carnival at night. So this is a big yearly event too. There's lots of big things that come up
Yes.
this time of year for us.
And so, you pick the events that you want to go to, like Vince is saying, and make it your own. I know we all get this expectation around the holidays that we're all chasing that perfect holiday, that Norman Rockwell painting. And I am here to say that in that painting where they're putting the turkey down, that 30 seconds later, the dog came in and crashed the table and the turkey ended up on the floor, right? I don't think anybody has had. Well, I'm sorry, Vince, what'd you say?
It's just the picture, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like you said, you get the picture. The rest of it's just life.
Yes,
I can't
exactly.
think of a Halloween where my kids that costume wasn't destroyed or taken off
Right.
within, the first 5 minutes of the day. But like you said, you get those memories, you get those pictures, you get them, wearing it, for a good amount of time. They're having a good time. They're smiling. They're enjoying themselves. That's the beauty of the holiday, is that they enjoy themselves.
Exactly. So I love, dealing with our stress, but if we have a kiddo who has a particular fear, like there's something that they're really skittish about, or they just can't even wear a costume. If there's something that we want to systematically desensitize, what do you recommend? Do they go to the team with that, Vince?
Well, I think your example was a perfect example of slowly working on a costume or wearing a part of a costume that a child might not want to for longer periods of time, right? You start with 30 seconds and then a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and so forth, right? This gives us plenty of time, going back to what we were talking earlier. Right now, we have plenty of time to start working on that. And I think that desensitizing, which is different per child, is important to take note of now. You're not going to desensitize your child in 2 hours before you go get ready, right? It's not enough time. So this is the time where we start having them wear the costume, or wear that part of the costume that might be uncomfortable for them. Maybe they don't like things on their head. Maybe they don't like things on their hands. But we start having them wear it for a certain amount of time, and then we give them a reward. Then we increase the time, give them a reward. And before you know it, when we get closer to Christmas, they're wearing it without even worrying about it, because they're already getting rewarded. They're having a good time. They're out. There's a lot of things that are distracting them, and that sensitivity that they might have had with their hands or their head or what have you is already worn off. So they're able to tolerate and wear those pieces of clothing without incident. But I think there is a misnomer that we can sensitize them in a quick amount of time, and that's unfortunately not true. So again, going back to why it's important to start in September to prepare for the end of October, part of that could be because you want to desensitize them to a specific piece of clothing.
And also in terms of expectations about candy, if our children can't have candy, we can talk to them about alternatives that they can have in terms of rewards, right?
I mean, there's certain candies they can and cannot. There's certain treats they can and cannot. There's certain prizes and activities that they can and cannot, right? So we use the combination. It's not just candy, right? As we all know, but it can be things that they like to eat, things that they like to do, things that they, a sticker, a stamp, a glitter, a pencil, there's different things that they might enjoy gathering and getting. I've even seen some where it was a token system and they were able to get certain tokens. And when they came home, depending on how many tokens they had, they were able to buy something, right? And again, it was something that they could eat or they could do or they could, obviously control in their home. So, what the family did is they went to their local neighbors and gave them a token. And each token had a different character on it, right? So it was something pleasurable. And so when they went, they would give them a token, say, hey, you get the special, Woody, token from Toy Story. And then they would get one from Bugs Life, and they would get one from different movies and what have you. So when they came home, they created their own system so that the child would get the reinforcement. They would get to eat, treats and things that were within their diet restrictions so that they felt included, like with their siblings and the other kids. It was wonderful.
And I love that. You could go around and give the tokens to the neighbors and say, my kid is going to come, and then you get to have that conversation. We did something slightly different, that we had the Lego fairy. And then I have friends who've had the Barbie fairy, right? So, my son didn't know what candy was. I think it's harder to do this after your child, but if you have a really little child and you can't do the candy right from the jump, and we couldn't, he thought it was fascinating. To him, it was colored lumps of paper.
Right.
Right? And what we started with him when he was 3 and just beginning to understand was, you get as much of that as you want, and then you leave that on the table, and the Lego fairy comes and leaves you a Lego. And back in the day, the first time it was a Duplo. And for my friend, the Barbie fairy comes and leaves a Barbie. And we did that for years. And he was always so excited to get the candy and put it on the table. But if you have a kid who already wants and knows what candy is, going around to the neighbors, let's face it, I mean, how many houses can you do?
Right.
Like,
right.
if you do 14, you're a miracle worker, right? That's like way more than you need to do. But if you had 14 tokens and went to the families and said, here, give this to my kid, then you could avoid the candy thing altogether.
Right.
And that wouldn't be a bad thing, to go to those neighbors' doors and say, my kid is going to be here, and I'm going to ask you to give them, and just keep that separate from my kid.
Yeah.
Right.
What a great way to connect with your neighbors. Good idea.
It is a great way to, and you can do it without a whole lot of disclosure either. You could just say, my child has, severe diet restrictions, and, but we want him to experience, this great event with all his peers. So could you just give him this one? And I'll be with him. So when you see me, we'll, give a thumbs up, and they'll know. And then again, the child has no idea what's going on. They know they get something special, something that they would like, something that, interests them, and they get a different one, so they're excited. And that's the moment, that's the joy, that's the purity right there, is they're excited to get something. It doesn't matter what it is. They're just excited to get something. They want to continue with the peers. They want to continue to interact just like everybody else. How we turn that in at the end, what they get at the end, then obviously that's individualized and specialized for every family. But that's the event. And then, like you said, it's a great opportunity to get to know some neighbors and maybe get them, to reach out to you as well.
And if you go to a neighbor's house and say, so my child has dietary restrictions, and I was wondering if I could ask you, if you're going to give Halloween candy out, could you just have this, and when my child will be wearing this, can you give this? And if somebody is a butthead about it, then this is not the neighbor's house to go to.
Right.
Right? Like, it's just like, oh, well, you and I were never going to be friends anyway.
Right.
And then you just cut a wide berth around their house and be like, hey, great talking with you. Because anybody who would be like, they're having to go buy candy to give away. And anybody who wouldn't want to participate with you and go like, oh, you're giving me something to give your child? Hey, come on in and have a cup of coffee.
Right.
Anybody who isn't that way, you really don't need to waste time on.
Right.
All right.
It's probably pretty rare, but you're right. If there is someone that's just a knucklehead, then you say thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We'll never be back here again. Right?
Okay.
Vince, you're amazing.
Yeah, these are some great tips.
Maybe in October we'll talk about what to do when you're going to dinner at somebody's house, and
For
they're
Thanksgiving,
going to
right.
comment on everything that your child eats.
Right.
Maybe that's what we need to take up next month.
Okay.
Sounds
We
good.
can do it early.
Thank you, Vince.
All right,
And
thanks,
Vince, for people, if they're card clients, that are getting card services, where can they get a hold of you if they're interested in more marriage and family counseling
Yeah,
concerns?
anyone can actually reach me at my email address, v.redmond, REDMOND, at centerforautism.com.
And
Okay.
he's a wonderful, wonderful resource.
Right.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you, Vince.
Thanks, ladies. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right, we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to be back with Jackie Folks and her book, Adventures with the Big E, Help with Hygiene.
There we go. Stick with us.
Well, I had friends when I was in high school in preferred activities like horseback riding, electronics, or model rockets. There's a tendency sometimes to just go on and on and on talking about the same thing. And this is where someone had to tell me, you're going to tell that story twice, and that's all that people are going to want to hear it. They're going to get bored with it after hearing it more than twice. Give them, say, hey, you know, you've talked too much about that robot. Let's talk about something else. Well, let's give some examples of things that are not perfect. Okay, if a photographer's working for the National Geographic, that would be at the pinnacle of photography career. But if you go through the National Geographic, you're probably going to find some technical errors like flare in some of the pictures. But overall, it's such a great picture, even though it had flare, you still use the picture. Also, if he's a science kid, bring up the concept of absolute zero, where all atomic motion is stopped. You can never get there, you can only approach it. You know, get the concept across of work up to a certain standard. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's got to be up to a certain standard. Well, when I was a young kid, there were expectations for doing things that other people want. It gets back to turn taking. Yeah, I'd sit through church even though I thought it was boring. But that's something the other members of the family wanted to do. And there were expectations for me not to be disruptive. And most of the time I behaved. You know, and that's just one step beyond turn taking in board games. You've got to learn to get your turn. Sometimes you get to pick out the movie, and other times brother or sister may pick out the movie we go to. Well, one of my really important teachers was Mr. Carlock, my science teacher. And he had interesting projects for me to do. And I worked on all kinds of stuff with optical illusions. And that actually helped me in some of my cattle work, because it made me pay attention to what the animals were seeing. And then that doing interesting science projects got me motivated to study, because now I had a reason for studying. Studying was a way to get to a goal of becoming a scientist. This is where a good teacher really turns a student around. Well, there's a lot of problems in the sensory system. Distorted input, sort of like pictures pixelating with a bad satellite dish, audio cutting in and out like a really bad cell phone. That a lot of the sensory systems are not working normally. In my book, The Autistic Brain, I've got a whole big section in there on sensory issues. And there's an interesting new study that's come out called Environmental Enrichment is an Effective Treatment for Autism. Now, I want to make it very clear, this does not replace ABA or speech therapy. It is an adjunct. And what's done in this, and there's a paper you can get online called Environmental Enrichment's Effective Treatment for Autism. You stimulate two senses at the same time, like maybe you do an aromatherapy, a cinnamon, something like that, touch carpet. You always changing the pair of senses that you stimulate. And one of the senses is always one of the more primitive senses, smell, touch, or balance. So there's a lot of emphasis on 8 different aromatherapies, and the people were, children were evaluated baseline. Controls got ABA and speech therapy. Experimentals got this additional sensory therapy. And then after quite a few months, they evaluated them again. And the experimental group that had the treatment had significantly better behavior. This is a refereed scientific journal article. And it uses simple household things, very simple to do. Environmental enrichment is an effective treatment for autism. You can download it online. I'll tell you some things not to do. Don't say you went to sleep, because then the child might be afraid that you went to sleep. When I was very young, we were out for a walk and came across a very flat squirrel in the middle of the road that had been run over. And it was very clear that the squirrel could not be put back together again. And that made me learn not to run out in the street because I wouldn't want to be like that squirrel. And there's no way the veterinarian could do surgery and put him back together again. I mean, basically, death of a person, they are gone. They are gone. Well, Oliver Sacks is a very kindly kind of professor type of person, and I read an article he wrote in the New York Times just before he died about going back doing the Jewish Sabbath, and at the end of the article he was talking about, well, if A, then B, then C, which way of his life could have gone down different paths, and I started really weeping when I read that article, and I'm glad it went down the path that where our paths crossed. I could barely print it out, I was so upset. No, fortunately, he was writing right up until the end. And he's overall really satisfied with his life. Well, after the article appeared in the New Yorker magazine, shortly after that, an agent appeared that suggested that I ought to write a book. And that's what brought the book Thinking in Pictures into being.
And we are back, and as promised, we have Jackie Folks, Jacqueline Jackie Folks, who is an author who lives in Eudora, Kansas, with her husband Mike, and she is the busy mother of 3 sons, and her middle son, Ethan, was diagnosed with autism. His diagnosis came at a time when there were very limited resources, so she found the time to go and look up all kinds of information that would be helpful to her son. And she is co-founded the Eudora ACES, Autism Community Education and Support Society. So Jackie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. And I'm holding up your book, Adventures with Big E, and this is Help with Hygiene. I imagine that there are going to be more in a series like this, but this is great because even this book, what I love about it, you know how when it's bedtime and it's time to read something with your child and you want to have that experience reading, but you want it to count for more.
Right.
This is wonderful social stories, and they have different chapters even within this book. It's not a big book, but for instance, the first one here is that Big E brushes his teeth. And then he talks through and says, he introduces himself and talks through how he brushes his teeth and why he does this and how it feels sensory-wise. But then if you want to read on, we get to see Big E do a whole bunch of things, including take a bath and
Yes.
all these other things all things that we want for our children to be able to do on their own eventually. But when they're smaller, we're going to help them through the different steps. I'm showing you here, Big E goes potty, and you can see that there's pretty much a task analysis that shows us all the different steps because sometimes our kids need to have this in so many different ways and so many opportunities for them to learn it over a period of time, and it can be exhausting to us as parents. What a great bedtime thing to read with your kiddo.
Exactly.
So love this. And as I said, other topics here including, let me just page through, Big E gets a haircut.
Right.
Yes.
Because that can be a big thing for our kiddos. Love the illustrations. Who did the illustrations for you?
An illustrator through Mascot Book Company.
Well, they're just precious is what they are.
And that section in particular took months of editing because haircuts were something that we struggled with for years and years and years. And I really wanted the sensory struggles to be depicted on the facial expressions.
Yeah, and here we have Big E gets dressed, and he talks about the things that bug him. I love this. That there's a section here where he says, the tags, sometimes the tags on clothes bother me. Sometimes the materials feel funny on my skin. If either of those things happen, I tell my parents and they cut off the tag or find another material that doesn't bother me. Now, what a wonderful thing to be able to read this with your child, not once, not twice, but hundreds of times so that they, because this is what we do at bedtime.
Yes.
And, you know, we can do this with lots of different things, but for a lot of our kids, this, oh my gosh, this kind of stuff can be the source of frustration, right?
And these were all things
Yes.
you experienced with Ethan, correct?
Yes, for years and years. And we still struggle with getting dressed part, dressing weather appropriate.
Right.
Which is one of the things, I mean, with especially with social stories, depending on the developmental level, this book can be good for 2-year-olds to 32-year-olds.
Right.
It just, I
Absolutely.
mean, it's very diverse.
And Ethan is now 18?
He is now 19.
Oh, he's 19 now, and he's able to master all of the topics in the book at this point.
He struggles a little with like I said, getting dressed appropriately. We still have to help him.
And, you know, I gotta say, you know, we all have young men about the same age.
Right.
My son just turned 16
And my son is
about to be
17, about to
18.
turn 18.
Right? So, and the hygiene thing, you know, it's a thing. And I'm still, you know, saying to my son, these things are important to other people. I know not to you yet, but
Right.
they are important to other people.
Right.
That people will judge you, you know, if your fingernails are filthy and, you know, you haven't brushed your teeth. I can't emphasize enough how much I would have loved to have had this when he was 3 and 4, that we could have instilled all this in him. I love when Temple Grandin talks about how her mother instilled her with certain rules at a very early age, and she carries those through, and she's all about manners and hygiene and things like that, but she says her mother drilled it when she was little.
Right.
Oh, you guys, what a great book. So, you know, I haven't let you say anything, Jackie, and I apologize for that, but
That's okay.
we needed to heap some praise on you. So, love that you did this. Let's start with, where can people get the book?
So you can get the book directly online at mascotbooks.com, but it's also available on Amazon. It's available at Barnes & Noble. It's available in electronic book form, so you can get it in Kindle and Nook. So it's just it's only been out live since July, so it's just popping up all over these places, but those are going to be your 3 main avenues.
Okay, great.
Wonderful. And so let's take a minute to talk about, because we want people to realize too that you're just an amazing parent. You're the president and co-founder, as Nancy said, of the Eudora ACES, which stands for Autism Community Education and Support Society. Talk to us a little bit about that organization.
A little bit about ACES.
Yeah.
Yes, what you do, the work you do in the community.
So when Ethan was diagnosed, and I live in a small town, and there was nobody else to talk to. There weren't local autism societies. 16 years ago, there weren't all the resources now. So I just went to my local newspaper and kept putting articles out to try to meet people. And over time, I met 2 other ladies, and we together started a support group called E-Man for Eudora Mothers Autism Network. And then this over years transformed into ACES. And what we do is we just try to answer as many questions people, especially in the beginning stages of the diagnosis, have. We help people with IEPs. But the main thing we do is every April we hold an autism walk here in our small town. And our schools do not get a lot of special education funding. So we then go to the autism classes, speech, OT, IRR, any special needs classes, and get a wish list of items that they need, and then we take that money and purchase those items for the school.
Okay,
Oh,
great.
awesome.
So the money you raise through the run goes to those purchases.
Absolutely, 100%.
How wonderful. So at this point in the game, with your son being 19 years old and having done this organization, what kind of advice do you have for parents who are just getting started now? And it's a different ball game now, right? Because there are more resources and there's more funding to get more services. But what advice would you give?
Network.
Network. I love it.
Network, because that is what I longed for. My biggest source of information was reading Temple Grandin books. But I didn't have other people bouncing ideas off of people, never losing hope. But But I think also too, just knowing, having done this for so long, you're going to try things sometimes hundreds of times and they're not going to work, and you're going to have to start over again, and that's okay. You just start over again and you're doing the best that you can, and to just keep going.
And how are you coping with Ethan entering young adulthood? How are you coping with that, and what steps are you taking with that?
So we actually recently just went ahead and sought guardianship. We were hoping after all these years to be at a point where that wasn't necessary, but for us it is necessary. And he's continuing to live at home. But we, you know, as well as I do, what keeps our kids going and keeps them out of regression is constant stimulation. So right now we have him in an 18 to 21 year adulthood bridge program. He goes twice a week to an autism program at our local community college, and he's in work study. So just like you start in preschool and you have all these steps just to get him through 12 years, we are now starting in adult transition to get him through the rest of his life.
Okay, great.
What an amazing story,
yeah.
and an amazing resource for our community. This is a great book to have to do bedtime stories with. And, you know, I love to make the reading thing interactive. And this is a great book to do it with because you've got all these little vignettes. So you read the page with your child and you say, "Where's the cup?" And you have your child, you prompt them to point to the cup, right? It helps to keep them involved in the story that you're doing, you know. And then when they get a little bit older, you can say, "How does he feel about, you know, when he's brushing his teeth? How does it, you know, what is his face saying right there?" And I love that you work so hard on the facial expressions. So you make it an enriched reading environment for them, and they're learning on lots of different levels. So great book to put into your repertoire at nighttime. You can even, I mean, there's numbers here that show the sequencing, and in the beginning you can say, you know, find the number 1, and they point to the number 1, right? And then you can say later on you can say what comes after when he puts the you know, so you're learning before and after. There's so many things in this book that you can work on, but you're building the social story of we do brush our teeth every day. And it's many different steps, and there are parts of it that we don't always love, but we do it anyway. Right?
Right.
Love it.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you so much for being here with us
Thank you,
for
Jackie.
sharing this wonderful thing, and encourage people to find this on all major booksellers, including Amazon. Adventures with Big E. Help with Hygiene. Are there going to be more books? Are you going to write on more different topics?
I've written 11.
All right.
11 books already.
Okay.
So we're
Wow.
just waiting. You know, we'd like for this one to take off. We do have an Adventures with Biggie Facebook page.
Okay.
Where we will post updates and story times. And right now we're just trying to decide what book number 2 will be, but we're really heavily just focusing on promoting book number 1.
Okay,
All right.
great.
Well, I'm with
Great.
you
Well, we'll
on
be on
this.
the lookout for the other books.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you
All right.
so much for
Thank
being
you,
with
Jackie.
us. All right.
Thank you.
You have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
Bye-bye. Really can't say enough good
Yeah,
things about
very
that.
good.
Wonderful. So we are like out of time.
Right.
Which is crazy.
And
that
do you
the
have
show-
anything to talk about what shows are coming up next
Yes,
week?
I
You have time
actually
for
do.
that?
So next week on Monday we have Your Rights with Bonnie Yates. She's going to be answering you guys' questions. And then we have Kelly Byron Johnson, who is the founder of Completely Inclusive. So we're going to be excited to talk with her. On Tuesday we have a best of show. On Wednesday, Evelyn Kung is going to be with us to answer your questions in real time. On Thursday we have autism expert Jessica Plogue Fragola, and she's going to forgive me for having slaughtered that name, and Stephen Clark, host of Cyber Time Bite podcast.
What is that?
We're going to find out.
Okay.
And then on Friday, Jeanette Marigo, who's the founder of Autism in the Classroom, which you know me, I'm like so excited whenever we can further that for teachers.
Right.
Because I believe that people who get into the field of teaching get into it because they want to help educate.
Right.
they don't want to deal with challenging behavior, right? And then we give them individuals now, like half the class has challenging behavior. And if we don't teach them how to deal with that effectively so we can get back to education, what are we doing? So I love when we have people who specialize in setting up the classroom a certain way to minimize those challenging behaviors and deal with them. So thrilled to talk with her on our show next week.
Right.
Until then, give your kiddos a hug
And
from
give
me.
yourselves a hug from me. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.